When I reviewed J. Cole's album The Off-Season in 2021, I put something in the video to make a very specific point. It was on the edge of the frame. I'm not surprised many people didn't give it a lot of attention. It's not like my videos have ever been known for their stunning cinematography so much as what I have to say. And moreover, it was not a music reference at all. It was a Toronto Raptors DeMar DeRozan jersey. Now, I'm a basketball fan, but I'm not a basketball YouTuber. And even if J. Cole had a flaming basketball hoop on the album art of The Off-Season, still one of the hardest pieces of album art in the 2020s, it's unabashedly awesome. He got that one off. It's a little strange that out of nowhere, I included the jersey in my shot when I hadn't done anything like it beforehand and haven't really done anything since. It creates the impression that I was looking to make a parallel of sorts, make a subtle point for those who actually caught the reference. So, okay, who's DeMar DeRozan? Well, in 2021, he had a complicated legacy, especially with the Toronto Raptors. He was drafted by the team 9th overall, and within a couple of years became, alongside Kyle Lowry, the dynamic duo that led to the Raptors some of their best seasons since Vince Carter was on the team. He was absolutely a franchise player in terms of pure scoring output. He contributed to an era of Raptors basketball that if they hadn't run into LeBron James multiple years in a row, there was a very real shot they could have represented the East in the NBA Finals. And as someone who lived through the LeBronto years, I have entirely too many thoughts on this era of playoff failure, because it wasn't just losing to one of the best all-time players dragging a far worse team behind him. LeBron just did that in the playoffs for the mid to late 2010s. It felt inevitable. It was how the Raptors lost, with a reputation for choking away victories, getting not just swept but embarrassingly so, demoralizing in a way where it felt like LeBron was in the heads of every Raptors player and coaching staff. DeMar DeRozan's performance in those playoffs is also similarly mixed. If you look at the box scores, he either played to his abilities and scoring output, and given that he was a willing but not great defender, that's about the best you could hope for, or he underperformed. He did not pull a Donovan Mitchell or Jamal Murray or Tyrese Halliburton to elevate in the postseason. So you were always left with that lingering question whether or not he could be the best player on a championship team. So in the 2018 offseason, after firing Coach of the Year Dwayne Casey, Raptors president Masai Ujiri traded DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl to the San Antonio Spurs for a one-year rental of Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. And the Raptors would go on a generational championship run that next year and win their first title in team history in 2019. Now, that was a trade that burned relationships in Toronto. DeRozan was a fan favorite. He was not consulted in the trade. It could have easily wrecked the locker room. But some perceived that his ceiling wasn't high enough to be among the best players on that championship team, which has been true on the three teams he's been on since: the Spurs, the Bulls, and now the Kings. He's a very good scorer from mid-range, but his three-point shot is iffy. He's never been a great defender. His postseason reputation's not great, yet I still have his jersey. But this is not a basketball video. It's also not a review. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and this is about J. Cole, the fall-off, and the mythology of average. I have a legacy of talking about J. Cole on this platform, going back to 2014 Forest Hills Drive and writing about Born Sinner on my blog the year previous, the second last written review before taking it to video. And that legacy is not exactly positive, not precisely negative either, but critical in a way that probably comes across as a lot more contentious, and some of y'all have done a fine job of meeting that energy. I know exactly what I'm getting into here. Indeed, the opening line of my review of The Off-Season is, "It's never been that I don't get J. Cole. If anything, I wish I understood him and his popularity even less. I might like the music more." Now, if you haven't seen that review from 5 or so years ago, I might echo some points here, probably worth a refresher, but I also think it's aged pretty well. Aged better than some might have wanted in the aftermath of 2024, an inflection point in hip-hop of which we have rarely seen. It's a year where perceptions of J. Cole changed fundamentally. And while he would not be the rapper who suffered the most grievous loss that year, the blows that he did take...
Yes! Flea Falls, boy. Fuck with me, Harlem.
So I didn't review Might Delete Later that year. Mostly because for his sake, I was hoping he would take the project up on its title and not just remove one of the weakest diss tracks released in the 2020s from the back end of it. I talked about a number of songs from it on Billboard Breakdown on my side channel. It had some impact on the charts for about a week, which was precisely as much time as it deserved. It's J. Cole's worst project by a comfortable margin. Many of the fans even now acknowledge this, and yes, worse than For Your Eyes Only, where it either sounds like someone was having way too much fun on the Drake tour, or was getting the worst possible advice at the worst possible time. Did it fundamentally taint J. Cole or his legacy for me? No, but that's because of the same reason I didn't review it. While it would have been the easiest money imaginable for me to just shout, "I told you so," for 10 minutes, not all easy money is good money. Something I really wish J. Cole had considered before he put out Might Delete Later, but it was an inflection point. And if we're looking not at quality, but the moments where J. Cole's name commanded the most conversation, it really came in two places. The first in 2014 when he made 2014 Forest Hills Drive. Not my favorite of his, but in popular culture, it's considered his best. It's considered a classic. We'll come back to that. And the other inflection point was in 2024, when he made his worst project. There are psychological studies that suggest people remember not only the most recent things, but sharp extremes of emotion. Consistent good quality tends to wind up getting overlooked. And when you consider that experiencing art is fundamentally emotional, it's not surprising at all that J. Cole himself has kind of recognized this. Hence, the fall off would be split into two discs, one representing himself at age 29 in 2014, the other at age 39 in 2024, where the album itself commanded such attention because J. Cole spent so many years highlighting it would be his final album. There was a song on 2018's KOD called 1985, Intro to the Fall Off. The setup has been long in coming. And even if you don't believe this retirement is gonna last, like his mentor Jay-Z, how much does anyone buy into a rapper retiring these days? One could not ignore the expectations. And it is worth talking about expectations here, because it became abundantly clear that mine were not in alignment with everyone else's in talking about the fall off, and that I barely had any expectations at all. As I said way back in 2021, J. Cole is the everyman superstar, the technically skilled but not exactly heady rapper whose greatest strengths come in relatability, accessibility. Like the rest of the millennial big three, he was willing to show a little more vulnerability, both in subject matter and craft. J. Cole's command of melody tends to be a little bit underrated in my opinion. He's not a great singer, but he can often find a very likable pocket. And while he built the reputation of showing up off record, trying to put the work in his home community, I wouldn't call him an activist, especially in his art. And I don't think he would call himself that either. I referred to him as rap's ultimate centrist in the off-season review, but with the benefit of time, I'd like to deepen that analysis beyond just the very obvious political implication. Yeah, there's a reflexive conservatism that's crept out in his music, especially around women and queerness, that can ring as really ugly if you're operating from a more left-wing point of view. As someone who holds that perspective, I still think his disses towards No Name are among the worst songs in his career. They reveal a shocking amount of ignorance and puncturing any sort of progressive bona fides that he claimed to have. But then I took a step back and thought, how much of that was expectation placed on him rather than based on what he's actually said in his art? Why was I so incensed that he didn't engage with No Name systemic critique? He's never shown that he was equipped to do it. If there was a mistake in the framing of my review of the offseason, it was the quiet expectation that in a moment where the left seemed to have some popular momentum, J. Cole didn't seem to want to engage with it on record. That he had the choice to really open a door to some challenging societal critique, aim bigger, and It didn't happen. But with time, I've come to realize that the offseason was never trying to aim that high. I can highlight the missed opportunity to push for systemic change, how he might be a good voice for it, but if you don't believe that change can happen, where your commitment more becomes doing the best you can within a tough environment, grind it out as long as you can, there is some genuine resonance in that. It's why I think the offseason has actually aged better than I thought it would. I'm also missing the mark by critiquing what I'm expecting the album to be rather than what it is, rather than who he is. I think I learned that lesson by my delete later. It's just a shame that it seemed like so much of the rest of hip-hop did not. Entirely too much discourse has been made about how J. Cole handled the conflict with Kendrick Lamar, who was clearly ready to engage in a much bloodier state of affairs than Cole ever was, where I've heard every bit of spin that suggested someone from TDE tipped him off, that was something that the beef was better off ignoring, be it Ab-Soul, who showed up on my delete later, or Schoolboy Q coming off a round of golf and the increasingly underrated Blue Lips. I mean, whatever helps the fan base sleep at night, because to me, neither the album nor the apology felt that out of character for J. Cole. And that was a major problem, because talk about meeting the moment in the worst way possible. There's a lot that was said about the weird reluctance lurking throughout 7 Minute Drill, where J. Cole wanted to come across as cagey and deflective and highlight how much Kendrick is not who he says he is, that Kendrick Lamar is playing the label game as much as anyone, and Kendrick is playing that game, let's not mince words there. But it was always the double speak that bothered me the most here, where for as many jabs as J. Cole threw at Kendrick Lamar's direction for his hypocrisy, Cole could be the recipient of many of the same attacks. He plays the industry games too. He can get calculating, he can throw low blows. He was certainly not the person to accuse anyone of making boring music. And let's not forget, in reigniting all of this, J. Cole was the one who started it in his verse on First Person Shooter. But I think around Might Delete Later, J. Cole probably believed the accusations of fakery and hypocrisy would hit Kendrick harder. The assumption that the one with more outspoken principles, holding himself to a higher code, the good kid in the mad city, that if you expose the fractures in that moral code, it'll hurt him more, because it becomes less about morals and more about sheer power. Drake had the exact same line of attack. If he hadn't been so quickly stepped on with way harsher lines, it might have even worked. But let's dig into why J. Cole thought it could work. And I actually think it goes back to how he's appeared to see the world across the past couple of albums. I'm going off of his words. If you believe the system can't be changed, it's intrinsic to how we live our lives. You see those who are trying to change it, they might be playing a long con on the audience. Nothing's really going to change. You know that. You're just using a lot of rhetoric to now put yourself on top with the moral high ground. Your true colors are going to show in just a matter of time. Now, how many albums have you already made about the corrupting influence of power, Kenny boy? It's pretty obvious you might think that. It's why Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers probably pissed Cole off, even if he couldn't quite explain it during Might Delete Later, because it was showcasing the hard internal work someone has to do to really bring about that bigger change outside of himself, starting from within and working outwards. An idealist flying in the face of what is self-evident when it's a system that has brought you so much power and success. Why compromise that? And if you're spending a little too much time marinating in booze and bad company on the Drake tour, I can see why you might wind up pushed in that direction. Your vices egged on by the devil on your shoulder. But Might Delete Later also exposed its half-hearted reality, where he might have been gassed up by his boys and his peers that he could do this. What you gonna do, Cole? But fully going there wasn't something he wanted to go do. I think he actually understands the reality of beef that inevitably moves off record to the streets, where both Kendrick Lamar and Drake have acknowledged the ugly reality of that on record, where there were casualties. And as much as we would all hope it's just some playful sparring where everyone resolves things in a few years and comes out on a festival stage together, J. Cole's too much of a student of the game to ignore history. More on that in a bit. And not for nothing, as much as I might have been disappointed with his failure to engage more deeply in the early 2020s, him being the ultimate hip-hop centrist works the other way too, especially if I give him all the credit acting not out of any fear, but as a pragmatist. He probably saw a lot of the weird reactionary shit that's poisoned the well around Drake. You know, the manosphere shit, the pervasive gambling, the worst streamers imaginable, all the hanger-ons in the entourage, and he got the fuck away from that. Especially if someone from TDE told him what sort of righteous, bloody vengeance would be coming down from on high from Kendrick Lamar. And there is some truth in sobering up, feeling your conscience kick in, where you attacked a potential friend, a possible friend. You might disagree with that friend fundamentally, but you still admire him on some level, because you're a peer in the same game. Skill and game recognizes game. You still have empathy. You don't believe any of that reactionary bullshit of how empathy is a sin creeping out of the far right. You might even remember all the rumors about making a collab album. You might dream it's possible. And at the end of the day, you might just respect sheer power, if only based on influence and scope. J. Cole called Damn Kendrick Lamar's best album, him in his prime, not because it is Kendrick's best, it's not, but because it was his biggest, something that can be quantitatively measured. And thus it also never surprised me that J. Cole apologized on the Dreamville festival stage. People tell you who they are. And while I don't have to respect what J. Cole did, more on that in a bit, there is a part of me that's more mature and understands it. Even if I roll my eyes every time I've heard a verse since where J. Cole implies that he could have actually gone there. Sure, buddy, we saw the rest of your 2024 in songs like Grippy. We remember it, so you don't have to. But seriously, what do you do after a moment like that? We'll get to how hip-hop culture responded to J. Cole in a bit, because that was by far the most revealing part of all of this, and I have a lot to say. Right now, I'm thinking about the man, the artist. You've spent years hyping up the fall off, and there will be some who will think it doesn't even matter because your 2024 already lived down to that title. You're always going to have your diehard fans, but the hip-hop culture at its core, well, in war games, the only way to win is not to play. And yet there's a part of you that will still think that you lost. Why else would you keep bringing up how often you could have won? And every good artist should have a clear idea when their story ends. I could tell he was weighing it on his mind back on the offseason. J. Cole's been looking on his path away from celebrity in the rap game for a long time. And I look back on the art of the offseason. He may have telegraphed it. He's walking away from a basketball hoop that's on fire, leaving the game behind, taking the ball, going home.
I say nigga from bus road, throw your hands up. It's that red boulevard, point line. I know the whole world blowing up your phone. I wanna know, nigga, when you're coming home.
The more I think about the fall off, the more I have simultaneously more and less to say about it. It's not his best project by a comfortable margin, nor is it his worst. I don't think it's a bad album. Certainly not one worth of all the hyperbolic praise or backlash I've seen in certain spaces. It does not evoke strong emotions from me. I think it's decent. And as someone who has a reputation of being way more negative than positive on J. Cole, I think that's noteworthy. To come out the other side not having much of anything to say, that's an improvement. And there are things that I want to praise beyond technical competency. We all know that. I don't love all the choices of his production or sample flips consistently, but he can still write a solid hook. I like the melodies he chooses to sing, and the arc of coming back to Fayetteville in North Carolina, having seen more of the world, and recognizing despite how small the place it is, it can still be home. There's potency there, especially when he can paint a scene like on Drum and Bass and The Let Out, the latter of which nails a certain hazy discordance that comes when you've been out at a club way too long and it's all about to tilt sideways. Now again, the album is far from a classic. The conceptual framework is really shaky, it's really underdeveloped, from the grimy back-home visit at 29 having made it, but especially on the more piecemeal second disc, where I gotta wonder if he had a bunch of leftovers there, or if he had to make this a double album as his final statement rather than any sort of quality control. And that's the polite way of saying that the album is really goddamn long and became tedious and scattered as the runtime dragged on. And J. Cole remains one of the great B+ students of the game, and that he's going to take several very obvious samples and interpolations and do them mostly well, even if you might question some of the good taste in doing so. Who the Fuck Is You has a very distinct early Eminem rhyme scheme. He samples and interpolates artists spanning Mobb Deep and Outkast to Petey Pablo and T.I. to Jennifer Lopez and Jenny from the Block. I Love Her Again is a very direct sequel song to Common's I Used to Love Her, but flipping another Common song while doing so, extrapolating the whole hip-hop as a woman arc to falling out of love with her yet again. Very relevant in exploring some of the album's themes. We'll come back to it. And of course, there's What If, the song that's wound up attracting the most attention because it's a wish fulfillment song about Biggie and Tupac reconciling, rap from both of their perspectives, mimicking their flows and their cadences. And yeah, we are going to have to get back into that one, but I want to actually highlight that early Eminem cadence, because I unironically think that Eminem and J. Cole have a lot more in common than one might think. Both are skilled technicians and storytellers who can bring out an accessibility in their content for easy crossover, but are also consummate students of the game. They revere the legends and have frequently referenced where they may not have lived up to that status playing the game despite being megastars. They are both local to a fault, which adds to a very potent sense of place in their music, but can be insular, very hands-on in the production of their albums, probably to the detriment as the production does not seem to be their strong suit in comparison with their rapping skill. They can both be cornier in their punchlines than they should be. They both have had bars that flirt with reactionary sentiment that's probably not reflective of a deeper political reality or any animosity or hatred, and neither of them feel remotely comfortable with celebrity, where you can tell there's a part of them that deeply wishes the hip-hop that they love would get all the flowers they themselves have received. Now, to J. Cole's credit, he seems to be a bit smarter in avoiding Eminem's most grievous missteps, learning from example, but he never took the chances Eminem did in his prime. He never had that intensity, the swings to the violent extremes. And J. Cole does seem to be a better businessman than Eminem ever was, probably a lot of the Jay-Z influence. Not to get too deep behind the scenes, but Dreamville seems to have at least more stable activity than Shady ever did. Although I do find it very notable that while Dreamville's in-house producers worked on the fall off, there weren't any features from Dreamville acts. Is that because this is entirely a personal narrative? If that's the case, why are future Thames and Burna Boy here? Or is it because you couldn't think of how to fit them in? Which is kind of wild, because if you're talking about legacy and influences, Jid is your natural successor, who already has multiple better albums in similar come-up narratives. And off his last album, God Does Like Ugly, has some of the same hesitancy you do. Why not put on Cause, or Baz, or Earthgang, or Jid if you want to add more variety, differentiate your track list, showcase what you're leaving behind if this is indeed your last album? Or are you just avoiding the Ari Lennox conversation? That she's no longer on Dreamville, and probably a bunch of people don't know that. And she just put out an album herself. That you could never get her career to take off. Isn't that say something? And you know, while I'm in the hot water, let's just keep going there. If you want to keep putting J. Cole in Big Three conversations, there's no way to avoid how, once again, another major Kendrick Lamar comparison that doesn't exactly flatter Cole, specifically to Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Putting aside how What If seems to be splitting the difference between Mortal Man and Reincarnated and is not better than either song, this is a double album. The final album from your major label contract, so there's this weird tension on the lack of label mates on the project, but with guest features that have you wondering why the label mates aren't there. It feels like a long-awaited, grandiose statement in its intent, but nevertheless leaves the less diehard fans kind of frustrated or underwhelmed in the lack of impact, especially if they want or expect a culmination, because you set it up. And when you consider Safety versus Auntie Diaries, the lingering feeling that Kendrick and Cole's hearts might have been in the right place addressing queerness, but the language and execution leaves a lot to be desired. In Cole's case, sounding like a dated story ripped straight out of Rent. And you know, this comparison's not new. There are progressions and thematic echoes between J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar for years now. KOD borrowing cadences from Untitled Unmastered, the off-season nakedly cribbing from Damn's thematic arc, and a half-focus heel turn literally centering pride and ego with distinctive religious undercurrents. But it's more interesting here because, again, I believe J. Cole when he said he didn't like Mr. Morale. And yet I think there is a part of him that may have gone back at some point in 2024, heard something that resonated with him, where he had his own internal journey and resonance to find, where in a similar arc to Mr. Morale, he found his inner peace and mindfulness not being your savior. Because like Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole ascended to that height of success, and he didn't seem happy. And if you recognize what I just said there, it's because I said it 5 years ago when I talked about the offseason. He was saying it then too. But more to the point, J. Cole is seeing everyone else around him who got to this point with him, the other legends, and they're also complacent. Or they're miserable. Go back to I Love Her Again, where J. Cole gets mad at hip-hop seemingly changing up, only for hip-hop to scream back at him that this is what she always was. On the one hand, an indictment of the old heads who never moved on with the times, but on the other hand, an acknowledgement that Cole himself also can evolve, with no attempt or desire to change that hierarchy, which always seems a little poison. Lonely at the Top is a stark midpoint of the project, and while I've never really liked Cole's attempts at flexing in this lane, an amplified performance that's never pulled me in, it's jarring hearing this followed by 39 intro, where even if I will buy the explanation the song is setting up for the second disc where the bragging is half ironic, or at least I hope it is, with lines like his mind has been trained like AI with NVIDIA chips, you know, regurgitating what's already been done better in the process of manufacturing slop. I do think there is an emotional arc that has resonance on the fall off. It is the long, winding road over decades that comes with accepting who you are, being the big man in a moment, and then what makes you happy. Yeah, Life Sentence is a corny love song, no way around it. And describing your relationship as a life sentence is a sort of joke that causes hacky sitcom writers to roll their eyes. But it feels true to who J. Cole is. I get why there's resonance. But let's talk about the people who didn't get that message. There's one last Eminem parallel that I can make with J. Cole, and it's not going to make anyone happy. The diehard fans, I don't know, let's call them stans, who will insist many times over that J. Cole is one of the best to ever rap, easily one of the best of his time, and who really don't want to hear about any competition to really challenge that point of view. Just prior to releasing my review of the offseason, I went off online saying that J. Cole, if he's your standard for excellence, you need to hear more hip-hop, and a lot of folks got really mad at me. And while I don't think I would get the same heat by doubling down on that line now, well, I already doubled down on it with Billboard Breakdown in 2024. To quote myself, he's a mid-tier rapper who got hype behind surface-level introspection, tedious production, and a series of admittedly impressive verses against weak mainstream competition. But I want to go deeper, because it's gone past just talking about J. Cole. We're now talking about what the culture's feeling, where I'm going to try to be a little bit more tactful in presenting observations, not calling these big declarations on what the culture is. I'm not one to legislate that. Because if you do keep it 100, if all you're judging is him between the charting acts in the mid-2010s and mid-2020s, I get why you could say J. Cole's among one of the best. I don't agree at all, but I've heard the argument, put him in the big three and all that, especially off that semi-legendary feature run. But if you venture even a little outside the mainstream, beyond what the music industry will tell you is the best in order to keep on buying and streaming it with the false equivalency of popularity equaling quality, you wind up a lot less impressed with J. Cole. Not that he's bad, but what he's doing is considerably less special. That his relatability and commercial appeal, it doesn't get the same flowers by those with stronger cultural ties, even if it might be an advantage for him, especially if they extend well offline into regional scenes. Prime example of this is 2014 Forest Hills Drive. Let's start with the hypothesis that it's his best album. I'll concede that to his target audience, it's a classic. But it came out in 2014. If you're going off the standards hip-hop set independent of playing mainstream games, for me it's not close to the best of the year, with Freddie Gibbs and Madlib Pinata, or Run the Jewels 2, or Pharoah Monch's PTSD, or Mick Jenkins' The Waters. That's not counting the underground gems that are less accessible, where I'd have to make more of an argument, like when Alchemist and Evidence teamed up for Lord Steppington, or when Evidence reformed Dilated Peoples for Directors of Photography, or Clipping's self-titled album, or Rat King So Be It, or Open Mike Eagle's Dark Comedy, or Sage Francis with Copper Gone, or Blues Good to Be Home. Hell, catch me on a different day and playing to the mainstream adjacent game, I'd say Schoolboy Q is better on Oxymoron, or Future is better on Monster. Look, my point here is that the class in which I judge hip-hop excellence, and what many say J. Cole's best album is not getting in that tier, okay, I'm willing to acknowledge it's subjective, but engaging with that subjectivity is something that the diehard stands, they don't want to do. I listened to over a dozen albums there, and a response that I know I will inevitably get is, nobody heard that shit. Well, says who? I reviewed nearly every project I just listed. I only came around to properly understanding that Future tape much later. Now I own it on vinyl, and I left off another half dozen albums that would have qualified that I'm just cooler on, but others like. So if your response is that you didn't hear that shit, that sounds like a you problem. It's not like these albums are inaccessible or hard to hear. We all have streaming, and if you're arguing this in my comment section, it's clear you got spare time on your hands to go listen to them. But there comes this certain refusal to look further. A desire to keep a chosen narrative so tightly that you don't engage with any information outside of it. Challenge your own boundaries. It's why I hate the big three discourse so much, because it artificially narrows the conversation on what hip-hop is considered relevant by the general public. There's so much more here. It's why I was never impressed by that generational feature run in the mainstream or just adjacent to it. Did you see who he was rapping alongside? Was he ever in danger of not being the best rapper on that track? And if he was, would you ever even acknowledge that? It's also why I hated the discourse last year that when Billboard changed their recurrency rules and for a week there was no rap songs in the top 40, it caused such a stir, Billboard writing their own headlines. It was an industry problem of its own making. Hip-hop had a fucking great 2025. And if all you care about is what's served up by the major labels, who will proceed to screw over every artist he claimed to love, why defer to major labels in defining your Overton window of taste? And I'm using Overton window deliberately there. It's a term from politics in the 90s, coined by John Overton, in terms of what discourse is allowed to be had in a public square, what's allowed to be accepted by the mainstream. Where there are certain ideas that are not allowed to be discussed, they're considered too far to the left or the right, or just out of the ordinary, considered too extreme. And there are forces on both sides that want certain ideas to get more traction, either widen the Overton window or pull it more in their direction. What deserves attention here is not how people shift to discourse, but what actually defines that public square. What defines that mainstream, where the discourse happens? I mean, the media plays a considerable role in it, but so does the cultural climate, so do people, so do regional scenes, so do those who have a vested interest in shifting things. Now let's think about what's considered acceptable in the mainstream in hip-hop. And that window of taste and broad accessibility, it's got a mirror to it. Those with vested interest are the record labels pushing artists. The cultural climate is just as relevant. And the media is, well, the media. Here's another observation. Have you ever noticed with certain mainstream publications that the same set of artists show up over and over again, not just in reviews, but publicity and write-ups, discourse at large, and in the era of search engine optimization, that popularity cycle becomes recursive. You write about somebody because they seem to be popular, and then they become more popular because you've written about them, so on, so forth, etc. What tends to get overlooked here is the influence of the money. Acts with deeper pockets or the right promotion or the right connections, they can influence that Overton window of taste in their direction almost independently of their art or any sort of review. especially if you're perceived to have widespread appeal. I mean, it's gross to admit it, but Drake was a master of this through oversaturation, memes, jumping on everyone else's sound. His ubiquity convinced many, especially the casual fans, that he was simply the best in the conversation, because he was always there. There had to be a reason for it, right? And here's where we gotta talk about competition. Because there's a sports element around hip-hop, the historical roots of battle rap tracing back to Africa, a hierarchy who is the best that can be built into the fundamental DNA of the genre, an amplification of the essential act of ego and creating art. And outside of rappers themselves, it's going to the barbershop or the gym, talking loudly about your top 5, where the content of your argument eventually stops mattering when the volume picks up. I would love to be the one coming here and saying that hip-hop doesn't need a hierarchy, that list only served to divide us and engender conflict where there doesn't need to be any, that we might get better music if there wasn't, that we have a lot more better struggles together, and that there's a broad swath of ideas and artists that can win, that aspirational spirit, we can all come together and work together even if we don't always agree. But this is where someone is going to call me a punk-ass bitch because neither Jay-Z or Nas are in my top 10, albeit for very different reasons. For the record, we are talking about art and the subjective, fundamental, emotional appeal, and that should be okay. But if you're in a lot of hip-hop spaces and think, what I just said, that Jay-Z and Nas aren't in my top 10, that's heresy? Well, that kind of makes my point. Over the course of decades, the hierarchy is entrenched far less off the music and art, but every qualifier around it. That's true with everyone. For me, commercial acclaim and popularity do not matter as much as consistency in one's art. It's why Jay-Z's multiple duds stand against him, like the multiple phoned-in albums with R. Kelly or Magna Carta Holy Grail. But if you ever bring that up, you're gonna get shouted down. And you'll realize just how much the popular glamour matters in memory holding the bad, the excuses we make for our favorites, how objectivity long went out the window despite everyone will claim that they're not being emotional in this conversation, even as our voices get louder. Because we as guys love to convince ourselves that righteous anger is not an emotion. But at some point, sales, the charts come up, and they all get manipulated. And you realize how much sustained mainstream popularity and relevance becomes a central factor as to why certain names keep popping up on the list, regardless of their bars or their consistent body of work, which become less a factor of quality and more around good business and PR. Where you're gonna get folks saying, of course there's no right answer, but there's a sense if you stray too far outside the established hierarchy within that Overton window of taste, you'll get the side eye. If that hierarchy and tier list might reflect some sort of reflexive conservative impulses. I mean, perfect example, going back to Jay-Z, you might say that the billionaire status doesn't matter one way or the other for being in a top 5 or top 10. But given how his wealth directly factors into his art's broader appeal and themes, that he did indeed make it and wants to pass along that knowledge, where the fact that it's him conveying that message, having done it, it becomes a factor in the emotional story, reinforcing the same capitalistic power structure that echoes the tier list. His advantage only compounding with time and his reputation. It's why it's so rare to see new rising talents break onto people's list unless they're very backed by a mainstream power structure. It's why so many are wary to re-examine the art of those who have passed away and skirt around how it may have aged. It's why commercial staying power is valued more than the underground classics that may have actually had more influence. It's also why women with better pens get consistently snubbed for any of those lists. How many top 5s or top 10s have at least one woman MC? And it's why J. Cole's apology and subsequent behavior on record was both the best and worst thing to happen to the conversation. Someone who ascended near the top of the hierarchy, through the mainstream, well within the Overton window of taste, the everyman, with a real groundswell popular support, hailed as one of the big 3 with a tangible skill set to back it up, many hailing him as the best traditional lyricist of the trio in terms of punchlines and flow, even if the albums never quite added up to more, whose fundamental appeal built on relatability, accessibility, competence within the mainstream framework, and with Might Delete Later was set up to take the top spot even if it wasn't his best effort, and then he goes and apologizes. And then praises one of the other members of the Big Three in turn. Are you kidding? For those not immediately incensed by the betrayal of the hierarchy, which on some level I get, there was some praise given to his maturity. A sober second thought. The smart decision getting away from what Kendrick and Drake were about to do, or potentially seeing a world where more collaboration within the best of the game could lead to more great music and a lot more money. Another note behind what ifs. The dream of a reconciliation between Biggie and Pac, that they can make something together. Only for J. Cole to release songs like Port Antonio and highlight just how much he could have dropped the hammer and leave everyone so consistently exasperated, especially when a whole other swath of rappers considered lower than him in the hierarchy start taking some shots and he doesn't respond. I mean, it's this weird self-serving attitude to examine, and I don't envy any fans trying to defend it. Because how can you defend it? The story keeps changing. The tactician excuse starts feeling flimsy, where it seems like J. Cole wants to try to buck the system, pursue the higher calling, but will then frame said system as inescapable, unchanging, and will still claim the benefit of that system to not respond to a Joey Badass or Freddie Gibbs, but he will shoot at some barely known local figure on the fall off who was talking shit? Yes, I understand the context of the album going back as the big man in town dealing with old business, but it reflects the same Nessie ideology, or lack thereof. And this is where, yeah, it's gonna become uncomfortable.
We need to change our ways, doing the same thing we did yesterday. Making beats, getting high, chasing freaks, feeling fine.
In the context of the broader range of rap music, I consider J. Cole emblematic of average. He can be good, he can be bad. The general fluctuation around decent. If I still cared about scores, the arc of his career is a 6 out of 10. Truthfully, if I want to give him grace and consider just the mainstream cadre of rappers, yeah, I still think that's an appropriate assessment, because the rules then become different. You start caring about hooks, song structure, melodies, production refinement, where J. Cole playing to the driest possible version of that winds up pretty average, as accessible bars and punchlines do a lot of the heavy lifting. If you're just saying bars are the only thing that matters, but you're only looking to care about other mainstream rappers, no, I'm not about to exclude the underground from the conversation just because you haven't heard them, because Cole has also been backed his entire career, and those other rappers might not have had the chance to enter with the same connections, even being afforded the same opportunities in conversation. And even then, Cole's got plenty of bad, corny lines. It's why the middling quality of the fall-off didn't surprise me. If you want a project that's emblematic of J. Cole, where the stands are going to get exactly what they want and everyone else won't, it's this. But average can still find meaning. It can still hit notes of quality. It just might not require the hyperbole of the hierarchy, being the best at what he does. That's the other strange incongruity with J. Cole's success. He is the relatable everyman, who liked to do it all himself, go platinum with no features, with some plain-spoken introspection that even if it does not go deep, it can still feel resonant to a human experience. And because of all that, he built a tangible fan base. He sold ridiculous numbers of records. It propelled him to the upper echelons of success that seemed to far eclipse any actual skill set or meritocracy, which might have very sharp limitations that don't hold up under scrutiny. But that's also not really surprising. There's always going to be a market for the comfortable, the relatable, the decent entertainment that doesn't aim that high or go that deep but doesn't have to, because people will still be satisfied. It's Cracked Rear View by Hootie and the Blowfish. It's the American version of The Office. It's Halo 3. It's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's DeMar DeRozan. And yet, because the mainstream hip-hop hierarchy places so much value on the limited Overton window of popular appeal, commercial viability, J. Cole was placed on that tier. He's one of the benefactors of the weird internal contradictions of poptimism's endgame, where the everyman appeal was given a pedestal, and he wasn't happy there. And he saw so many people, so many of his legends unhappy there too. I mean, don't take it from me, take it from the man himself. Across multiple projects where he sounds miserable engaging with the industry ecosystem, playing the game, seeing his legends demystified, and he's most happy at home. in a local space with his wife and kids, where you can tell his priorities have fundamentally shifted. Hell, they've probably been there longer than we've realized. And thus we hit the hard contradiction of the fall off for the fans, because J. Cole feels more honest with himself than damn near ever before, and there is a plain-spoken everyman reality to his exit/retirement that feels emotionally true. The album will be considered important because of many of the signifiers in music circles of importance. Certainly not the content or sound or thematic revelations. It's a double album and a loose concept album framed around retirement, a two-pronged return to his roots at the two sharpest inflection points of his career, but it's also not grandiose or showy, not set in a finale vibe. It's the reality that the majority of careers do not end with a bang but a whimper. That made a brief stir at its time, but ultimately never felt that special, may not have lasted. And maybe deep down he finally understood that's okay for him, because he's choosing not to play the young man's game of hip-hop anymore, not take up with her. But like most older men, he's still convinced he can still show up everyone on the court in a certain frame, when there's a time when he did. He's not one to play to extremes in politics, even in the moment might feel like he could or should. If anything, Cole sounds distinctly uncomfortable with extremes, not pushing too far. I think that's part of his fundamental appeal too. The big quiet guy who's got a good vibe and you can have a beer with him. And there's a certain wish fulfillment plays out for someone like J. Cole becoming one of the biggest artists of the world. I think the harshest indictment of Cole is that he seems normal, for better or for worse. And thus stepping away from being truthful about that can sting all the greater along those who relate so deeply to him. And that he's moving on and you might not be in the same place to do the same. And that's a shame, because it's hard for me to think of what J. Cole being from North Carolina and not think a little brother from that same state who embraced grown man hip-hop with a mature comfort, even if it's not quite grabbing the same spotlight. I kind of wish it could. I think of Saba from Chicago, so obviously influenced by J. Cole in his career, but finding a smooth, cool grace with no ID just last year. And I wonder if J. Cole found that smaller spotlight, he might have wound up happier for longer, seeing the opportunity for a new game to be played, one he might like more. And it's funny, I made a reference to J. Cole analogous to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Average, which is kind of ironic, that whole usage of the Spider-Man meme and first-person shooter that propagated so much of this, that's tied to Marvel. But I think it runs deeper in how Marvel sees its heroes compared to DC. In broad strokes, Marvel are the heroes that you can relate to. DC are the heroes you look up to. At the MCU's best, right in the middle of J. Cole going on his feature killer run, there was always going to be the question of how you move on. When does the self-referential arc of stories run out of gas for actors to see the end of their stories and move on themselves? And how much have we observed the MCU struggle with the scope of expectations when in reality at its best it's a terrific crowd-pleaser franchise? It's not trying to say or do much more. The reality is that J. Cole appears willing and able to move on. Be a good husband, be a good father, help in the community on a smaller scale, which is just as valuable. Hang up his jersey and walk away from the game and happy knowing who and what he is. And I go back to that old video that Mike the Snare made a couple of years ago, exploring the whole idea of mid, where in combining thoughts of when we complain about music, what we're really complaining about is other people, from Khalifa Sene, and everything that irritates us can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, from Carl Jung, where Mike the Snare came to the remarkably astute place of, when we're complaining about music, what if we are complaining about ourselves? I think there's something really poignant at the core with J. Cole, and especially the fall-off at the best and worst. We really struggle with conceptualizing a lot of our lived experiences as average, and this album forces you to confront it. And I'm not excluding myself here. Nobody wants to confront it about their lives. Some of this is the social experience of fandom. You want to be a fan of the best, not an act that tends to get more shrugs than cheers. Hell, that's even more true with hip-hop and the heavily socialized hierarchies that get entrenched. Some of it's nostalgia. You don't want to reckon with the fact that someone giving you more of the same just is not hitting the same way it used to. Some of it is a play for value. You don't want to feel like you're wasting your valuable time listening to something that's pedestrian that you've heard before when your taste has to be meticulously curated online. You want to have better entertainment at least. And some of it's the distressing twinge that everyone's getting older. and your life and experience moves on while the young man's commercial game remains somewhat the same, then the majority of your life is not going to be exceptional. On average, the majority defaults to an average experience. And J. Cole's low-key workaday charisma gave the fleeting escapism that you could embody more. And it stings knowing he might be able to move on and you can't to the same degree. Especially if you know that J. Cole might have been afforded opportunities that aren't as available broadly anymore. Indeed, if I think J. Cole missed a chance with the fall off, it's channeling the aspiration of a song like "And the Whole World Is the Ville," either embracing that self-affirming grind set of the off-season, of that hierarchy, that American dream, or how coming together the average can add up to more. Allow the ordinary to become extraordinary. But he doesn't really leave much of a statement, so much as having the power to control the end of his story on Ocean Way. Yet, for so many, that's not the experience. And I get not wanting that to be the end of the story. If we perceive art as light entertainment, it's easier to accept the ordinary. Be comfortable with the reality of so much of our experience, and for so many, that can be enough. It might seem like a dream to expect more. Ask that there's more than just consumption, but evocative, stirring of the spirit to challenge ideas and people and systems to dream bigger, not just encapsulate the ordinary, the comfortable, what you want to put on when you're tired, but help inspire the extraordinary that leaves you sleepless. But I believe deep down that capacity exists, where people can rise to the challenge and growth and understanding if given opportunity, space, and something to galvanize them. If not just in one ascending to the top, then maybe those who come together and do more. J. Cole's art exists in a tension between those worlds, a monument to the mythology of average, how for so many, it's enough and they'll be happy. But the tragedy comes in every glimpse to the larger myth where he felt inadequacy, disillusionment, and then a weary acceptance as his limits of power and others' imagination made themselves clear. And I can't abide it because deep down, for as much as I can relate to knowing oneself and finding bigger priorities in love and family, I know how that despondency can take root. So you don't take chances. You play it safe. You deny yourself deeper introspection and knowledge of yourself and others because they can hurt too much. It takes too much work. And then you deny yourself agency and power along with it. Because there's nothing wrong with coming to know who you are and what you can do. If that gives you solace and peace, a place in this world, that is a privilege so few have. And there is a certain nobility in helping others find the same. To some, the mythology of average is enough. And that's fine. For some, it will never be enough. For you to feel a passion to do more, create more, recognize that you can indeed spur change, either on your own with sheer force of will or power, or helping spur the broader nation. Push the limits of the language and Overton window in which we think and feel in order to make things better instead of the disquieting mental ease of privilege, complacency, and stagnation. J. Cole is right. In this system, the fall-off's inevitable. He was able just to choose his time and place. Be it claiming yours, or switching courts to play a different game, or changing up the court entirely. I don't know what the real inspiration is, but it should be up to you.